Goblin Reddit. Today's story is
My grandfather cut me out of his life for 14 years because I married the man I loved. Now he is desperate to contact me, and I discover the devastating reason behind his calls. 14 years ago, my grandparents, who had raised me since I was a child, decided to completely cut me out of their lives. The reason? They did not approve of my decision to marry my husband. In their opinion, he did not meet their standards. He was not worthy of bearing their surname or being associated with their social position. This decision caused me deep pain, leaving me with feelings of abandonment and betrayal. After all, these people had been my only family for so many years. You should know that when I was just 7 years old, I lost my parents in a terrible accident. Fortunately, my grandparents stepped in and took custody of me. For this, I will always be grateful to them. They had no obligation to take responsibility for another child, especially at their advanced age, but they did. Instead of ending up in an orphanage or foster care, I had a stable home and people who, in their own particular way, provided me with love and security. I grew up in a house where I never lacked the basics, and for that I will always be grateful to them. However, my gratitude does not erase the reality of my experience under their roof. Although they provided me with care, I also endured a lot of emotional and mental pressure due to their strict and controlling methods. My grandparents were extremely traditional, with rigid ideas about how life should be lived. They professed a deep faith and expected me to follow their beliefs without question. This was in stark contrast to the upbringing I received from my parents during my early years. They, while they were alive, were more relaxed and open-minded. They never pressured me to follow any religion in a strict way. With my grandparents, it was completely the opposite. They had rules, lots of them, and they were all non-negotiable. Breaking them was simply not an option. My grandfather, in particular, ran the house like a military barracks. He had spent years in the army, and this was clearly reflected in his behavior and in the way he treated others. Instead of asking for things, he gave orders. He expected absolute obedience and discipline from everyone around him, including my grandmother. In many respects, she suffered most from his controlling nature. She was expected to take care of all the cooking, cleaning, and housework without any help from him. Even when she was exhausted or ill, from childhood I could see the imbalance in their relationship. As I grew older, life with my grandparents became even more restrictive. They didn't allow me to be a normal child, not even remotely. While other children my age could play, make friends, or enjoy the simple pleasures of childhood, I was not allowed to do most of these things. For example, I was forbidden to wear skirts, dresses, or sleeveless blouses. They considered this type of clothing inappropriate, even indecent, as they didn't want me to show my arms. My hair had to be braided at all times, without exception. Loose hair, as they called it, was not acceptable in their home. My appearance always had to conform to their rigid expectations of modesty and discipline. They didn't care that I was just a kid who wanted to dress like my classmates or try a different hairstyle. Everything about my appearance and behavior was dictated by their so-called rules. And it didn't end there. After school, while other children could spend time with friends or stay a little longer to join a school club, I had to run straight home, no detours, no excuses. Once home, I was expected to pray and immediately start my schoolwork. My grandfather would meticulously check my backpack every night, and if he discovered that I had received low marks on any of my assignments, then I would be denied dinner. And I would have to go to sleep hungry that night. My room also had to be spotless at all times, without a speck of dust in any corner. And if they found even the smallest thing out of place, they didn't just scold me, they gave me 10 slaps on the palms of my hands. I can still remember the sting and how I cried every time, but they didn't care at all. I was also not allowed to have friends unless my grandparents approved of them. And as you can probably imagine, their standards of approval were almost impossible to meet. If they didn't like someone's family, their background, or even the way they spoke, that friendship was off limits to me. And as if all this wasn't enough, my grandfather also had the old-fashioned belief that women didn't need to learn to drive. So when I turned 16 and wanted to drive like other teenagers, he didn't just discourage me, he flat out forbade it. For him, women and engines were a bad combination, and any dreams I might have had of getting behind the wheel were dismissed as silly. Looking back, it seems unbelievable to think how much I put up with. At the time, however, I accepted everything because I had no choice. This was my life, and it was all I knew. I had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. His house was my whole world, and I convinced myself that his rules were normal and that this was how every family worked. It wasn't until I got to university that I started to see things differently. But even getting to university was an uphill battle. My grandfather was firmly against it. In his mind, I didn't need a higher education. He thought my time would be better spent marrying the son of one of his close friends. He had it all planned out, as if my life were a chess piece that he could move around at will. But I couldn't accept that destiny. Deep down, I knew I wanted more for myself, so I begged. I implored him to let me go to university. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of humiliation in the process, but he finally gave in. Once at university, for the first time in my life, I experienced a taste of freedom and began to see how different life could be. When I met my husband at university, I was honestly surprised that someone like him would even want to talk to me. I had spent my whole life in such a controlled and suffocating environment that I didn't know how to relate to people my own age. I was socially awkward and lacked self-confidence. I had no idea how to make friends or even have a casual conversation without questioning every word I said. But he made it all easy. From the very first moment, he made me feel comfortable, as if I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. He saw through the barriers I had built around myself, and instead of judging me, he gently helped me tear them down. We started out as friends. He never pressured me or rushed me into anything. Slowly but surely we got to know each other, and before I knew it, we had fallen in love. It wasn't the kind of love that takes your breath away in a dramatic way like in the movies. It was calm, steady and kind. The kind of love that makes you feel safe. I can honestly say that I am lucky to have found him because he transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. Meeting his family was a real eye-opener. I had no idea what to expect. But from the moment I walked into their home, they were incredibly warm and welcoming. They welcomed me with open arms and treated me as if I belonged there. It was completely different to anything I had experienced before. Seeing them interact with each other was revealing. There were no screams, no harsh words, no rigid rules hanging over their heads like dark clouds. They respected each other, they laughed together, and they supported each other in a way that felt so natural. I hadn't realized that a family could function like that because my experience with my grandparents had been completely the opposite. Over time, his family made me feel like one of their own. They didn't just welcome me into their lives, they embraced me fully. It was the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to sacrifice my identity or tiptoe around someone else's expectations. That feeling of acceptance and love gave me the strength to start imagining a life beyond the limits my grandparents had imposed on me. During university, however, I kept my relationship with my boyfriend a secret from my grandparents. I knew how they would react if they found out I was dating someone. They didn't want me to get involved with anyone. For them, my entire future was already decided. I was destined to marry the son of my grandfather's friend, and any deviation from that plan was unthinkable. So I hid the most important part of my life, keeping my love and happiness in the shadows. After graduating from university and securing a good job, I finally found the courage to confront my grandparents. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done when I told them I wanted a different life. A life I chose for myself. They reacted exactly as I feared they would. My grandfather, in particular, was furious. He accused me of having deceived him, of having used university as a way of escaping his control. He told me he felt surprised and betrayed, as if I had been plotting against him all along. In his eyes, securing my independence was an act of rebellion, not a step towards building my own future. My grandmother was also deeply disappointed. She begged me to come home, to live under her roof and her rules again. She couldn't understand why I would choose to defy them or reject the life they had planned for me. Her main argument was that I was angering God by going against his wishes. She truly believed that by refusing to marry the man they had chosen for me, I was endangering not only my happiness, but my soul. Despite their constant disapproval, I ignored my grandparents' words and continued to build the life I wanted for myself. My husband and I stayed together, growing closer every day. 2 years into our relationship, he proposed, and I was more than happy to accept. It felt like a moment of pure joy and love, a new chapter beginning, one full of hope and possibilities. But as expected, my grandparents saw it as another opportunity to express their resentment and disappointment towards me. When they found out about the engagement, they invited me to lunch. At first, I thought that maybe this was their way of extending an olive branch. I hoped, perhaps naively, that they would want to make peace or at least try to understand my decision. But as soon as I arrived, it became clear that their intentions were far from kind. Lunch quickly turned into a session of verbal abuse and emotional manipulation. They wasted no time in telling me how disappointed they were in me. My grandfather, in particular, did not skimp on harsh words. He said that my parents would be ashamed of how it had turned out and tried to make me feel guilty so that I would break off my engagement to my husband. According to them, he was not good enough for me. They claimed that he was not doing well financially compared to other men they believed I could have chosen to marry. I pointed out to them that my husband and I were in our early 20s, and it was ridiculous to expect someone my age to be richer than me. Besides, I didn't care about his wealth. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to share my life with. But none of that mattered to my grandparents. The only thing that seemed to matter to them was that my husband did not come from a wealthy family, and that they had always dreamed that their only granddaughter would marry a rich man. My grandfather, always critical and demanding, compared my husband to other men who could, in his words, provide me with a life of luxury and even help them financially if necessary. It was all about status and money for them. They didn't care how much my husband loved me or how much he had already done to support me. For them, love and companionship were secondary to wealth and appearances. To make matters worse, my grandfather declared that if I really went ahead with the wedding, they would have no choice but to cut off all contact with me. He made it sound as if it was all my fault, as if I was forcing them to present me with this ultimatum. He said that by marrying my husband, I was signing up for a life of hardship and abandoning the comfortable life they had imagined for me. It was their way of trying to scare me, of making me doubt my decision. But the truth is that I had listened to their criticisms and endured their judgments for too long. I knew the life I wanted, and I knew I deserved to be happy. My husband had shown me what true love and support is like, and I wasn't going to give that up just to satisfy their outdated expectations. So, even though their words hurt, I stood my ground. If cutting me out of their lives was their choice, then so be it. I wasn't going to let their bitterness dictate my future. So I went ahead and married my husband, and I can safely say that I have never regretted that decision, not even for a moment. Over the years, my husband and I have faced our fair share of challenges, but we have weathered every storm together. Whether the times were difficult or joyful, we have always had each other, and every morning I still wake up feeling grateful for the love we share. We are now a family of 4 with 2 wonderful children who have brought so much light and joy into our lives. Looking at our little family, I often think about how different my life would have been if I hadn't taken that leap of faith to choose my happiness over my grandparents' expectations. My husband has been my rock, my partner, and my best friend, and our life together is everything I could have wished for. But even with all the happiness I found, there is still a part of me that suffers for the family I lost. It has been 14 years since I last spoke to my grandparents. I have made efforts to communicate with them over the years, hoping for a reconciliation, but my attempts have always been met with silence. They have chosen to cut me out of their lives completely, as if I didn't even exist. According to some of my relatives, they don't even talk about me and act as if I never existed for them. It's heartbreaking to know that the same people who raised me now see me as nothing more than a disappointment. But as painful as it is, I have had to accept it as part of my reality. This week something unexpected happened. My distant cousin, someone I occasionally spoke to, called me out of the blue. She told me that my grandfather had contacted her, asking for my number so that he could get in touch with me. I was stunned. After 14 years of silence, this sudden interest felt strange, even suspicious. My cousin thought so too. She told me that she wanted to warn me, as she had already shared my number with him, and wanted me to be prepared in case there was more to it than met the eye. Part of me felt a glimmer of hope. Could this be a sign that my grandparents had finally changed their minds and wanted to make peace? Could my grandfather, after all this time, have reconsidered his position and decided that he wanted to reconnect? But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the doubts that were beginning to arise. What if there was an ulterior motive? My grandparents had always been controlling and demanding, and it was hard not to wonder if this sudden desire to communicate was linked to something more than genuine regret. Yesterday, my grandfather finally called me. It had been 14 years since our last conversation, and hearing his voice again was strange, almost unreal. He greeted me awkwardly, as if he didn't know exactly how to start. The conversation started with trivial topics. He asked me how I had been and seemed genuinely interested in my life. I told him about my current situation, about my husband and our 2 children. He expressed interest in meeting them, asking questions about them, as if he wanted to familiarize himself with the family he had formed. For a moment, it felt almost normal, as if he were trying to bridge the gap that had grown between us. But I couldn't ignore the elephant in the room. I asked him directly why he was calling me after so long, especially since he and my grandmother were the ones who had pushed me away in the first place. I didn't beat around the bush. I reminded him that I was still happily married to the man they had so strongly disapproved of, the man they thought wasn't good enough for me. It was then that my grandfather began to explain himself. He said that he and my grandmother were getting older, and they just wanted to reconnect with me before it was too late for them. He went on to say how he regretted having pushed me away all those years ago and how he had missed me but had been too stubborn to admit it. To be honest, when my grandfather said he had missed me, something didn't seem right. My instincts kicked in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. You see, my grandfather is not the kind of person who talks about his feelings. Growing up, I can't remember a single occasion when he expressed emotions like missing someone. He was always stoic, authoritarian, and distant. He didn't even miss his own parents. That he would suddenly use such emotive language felt completely out of character. And then there was the question of timing. If he had really missed me, why had it taken him 14 years to communicate? Why now all of a sudden? I couldn't help but question his motives. People don't change overnight. And my grandfather has always been someone who values control and his own interests above all else. Could it be that he needed something from me? Was it genuine regret, or was there something else driving his decision to call me? My grandfather went on to say how he wanted me to visit him and Grandma with my children and spend time with them. But when I asked if my husband could join us on the visit, he said bluntly that he would prefer that man not to come, making it clear that my husband was still not welcome in his home. Only me and the children were. That comment immediately infuriated me. My children are not just my children. They are as much a part of me as they are of my husband. The idea of welcoming my children while excluding the man who helped raise them and who has loved and supported me for years made no sense at all. I found his comment insulting. My husband is as much a fundamental part of my life as my children, and any attempt to ignore or exclude him is an attack on our family as a whole. I didn't hold back. I told my grandfather directly that if he was serious about wanting to reconnect with us, then he needed to stop putting these conditions and restrictions in place. I made it very clear that if he still couldn't accept my husband, then there was no way that I or the children would want to be part of his life again. I explained that my husband is my better half and my partner in every sense. I refused to allow anyone into my life if they didn't respect or exclude my husband, family or otherwise. That's just how I am, and that's the standard I hold for anyone who wants to be part of my life. My words did not go down well with my grandfather. He became enraged and began a diatribe saying that I was trying to force him to like my husband and that it didn't necessarily have to be that way. He argued that my children and I were his family, so it was reasonable for him to only be in contact with us. Again, insinuating that this relationship could exclude my husband completely. According to him, my husband didn't need to be involved for him to reconnect with me and my children. At that point, I had had enough. First of all, he was the one who had called me after all this time, and instead of taking any responsibility for his past actions, he was still trying to control me in the same way. Secondly, he was refusing to respect my feelings as always and was demanding that I agree with him, whether I liked it or not. So I told my grandfather clearly that if this was his stance, then we had nothing more to discuss. I was not going to compromise my values or the unity of my family just to please him. With that, I ended the call. Since then, my grandfather has been calling and leaving me voicemails as I am not answering his calls. He is clearly angry about how I am handling this situation. He has accused me of being too arrogant and has said that, because he raised me, I owe it to him and to Grandma to at least give them a second chance. According to him, my refusal to reconnect on his terms is unfair and disrespectful. And he keeps insisting that I should just forget the past and agree to rebuild the relationship with him. Am I the bad person in this situation? Update 1. First of all, thank you to anyone who has validated my suspicions. My intuition tells me that something about my grandfather's sudden desire to reconnect doesn't add up. He is a very toxic man, and I find it hard to believe that after 14 years of silence, he would suddenly miss me and regret having pushed me away. There is a strong possibility that something is motivating him beyond what he is willing to admit, and I cannot ignore that feeling. At the same time, I also want to be fair and acknowledge the slightest possibility that I could be wrong. If his intentions are genuine, if he truly regrets his actions and wants to make amends, then he might be open to the idea of allowing my children to get to know him. One thing is non-negotiable. If my grandparents want to have any relationship with my children, they must also accept and respect my husband. Allowing my grandparents to participate in their lives while excluding my husband would send the wrong message, not only to my husband, but also to my children. I refuse to model that kind of behavior for them. However, if by any chance my grandparents are willing to take responsibility for the past and meet me halfway, then I will consider taking small steps towards rebuilding a relationship. This does not mean forgetting the harm they did to me or jumping into things without caution. It means setting clear boundaries and moving forward only if it feels right for me and my family. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. Now I can say that I was right to trust my intuition. I've just heard some worrying news. My grandmother has become seriously ill. She has been hospitalized, and the doctors have diagnosed her with kidney failure. She is on dialysis and urgently needs a kidney transplant. It turns out that she and my grandfather have been trying to get in touch with me because I am the only granddaughter they have. And by extension, my children are also their only great-grandchildren. They need to find out if any of us could be compatible for her kidney transplant. I found out about my grandmother's condition from some of my distant relatives who have recently visited my grandmother in hospital to see how she was. According to them, she looks frail and very ill. She is clearly in a critical condition. From what I have been able to gather, this is the reason why my grandfather has been so desperate to reconnect with me. The urgency in his calls now makes sense. He has been relentlessly pressuring me to visit them so that he can then suggest that we get tested. He clearly wants to know if we are compatible for a kidney donation for her. Now that I know the full situation, I am honestly furious and deeply angry. On the one hand, I feel compassion for my grandmother's health condition, but at the same time, I am still dealing with the history I have with my grandparents and my own feelings of betrayal. How dare my grandparents assume that they can just come to me and my children expecting us to be their lifeline because they need a kidney transplant. After 14 years of silence and toxic behavior, they suddenly expect us to drop everything and give them something as valuable as an organ. How dare they assume that we would even want to help them? They didn't care about maintaining a relationship with me, my husband, or my children all this time. Now, in a moment of crisis, they suddenly think it's acceptable to come back into our lives as if nothing had happened. Their audacity is outrageous. Update 3. A week has passed since my last update, and my grandfather contacted me again. This time I told him that I knew exactly what was happening with my grandmother and that neither I nor the children were interested in helping them. I told him to ask other members of the family for help if they were willing to help. That was when my grandfather became defensive and started attacking me. He said things like how I had ruined my life after marrying my husband and how I had made a big mistake by marrying a man outside our religion. Those words hurt me deeply. He made it very clear that if I had married someone of the same faith, I would never have strayed from his life. This was the moment when everything clicked into place for me. All these years I had been wondering why my grandfather couldn't accept my husband, why he was so resentful and contemptuous of him, even when my husband had never done anything wrong. Now I finally knew the truth. It all came down to religion. When I realized this, I was even more furious with my grandfather. I told him firmly that I was ashamed to even be related to someone like him. A man who could be so blinded by his hatred of a person based on faith or religion could never be part of my life. Nor could he be around my children. I told him that I would never forgive him for what he said, for the way he had treated me, my husband, and my children, all because of something as ridiculous and hateful as his intolerance. I couldn't believe that there had always been a part of me that thought that maybe one day he would change. But now, listening to his blatant bigotry, I knew there was no going back. It was then that my grandfather tried to change his tone. He began to say that even if I didn't like him, I should at least consider helping my grandmother, who was ill and needed our support. He tried to appeal to my feelings, saying that I owed it to him, since he and my grandmother adopted me after the death of my parents and raised me. That's when I told him that living with them was no bed of roses. I had already paid my debt by suffering under their roof for years. I followed all their rules and was still punished by them, all because I married a man outside their faith. I told my grandfather that although I was sad about what they were going through at the moment, it was not my responsibility to help them. After all, they were no longer my family. My grandfather started insulting me and calling me unpleasant names, but I paid no attention to the old man. I cut the call short and blocked him. I couldn't bear to listen to his toxic and manipulative words any longer. He had made his opinions clear and finally shown me who he really was. I wasn't going to allow someone like that back into my life or that of my children, no matter what blood ties we shared.